No expectations of anything going wrong, really, just casually strolling by to the next hangar, routine repairs, no war zone, deep combat, assumed patrols or ambushes. But now there's a door there. There's a door in the hallway where it's not supposed to be. Your systems are saying there was. All the previous blueprints, previous records, any kind of connection to the larger OmniNet says that door should be there. It's locked, you don't have access to it, something is going on. Then all of a sudden, your Lancaster begins marching in an opposite direction from where you're controlling it. Your neural bridge doing nothing. Your mech is right now out of your control, walking to who knows where, to what ambush, to what attack, something's happening, you can't call out, your systems are jammed, and what is causing all of this? But that thing. Hi, hello, and welcome back to LANCER, our favorite mech tabletop RPG where the green, gribbly, greedy, and godlike are all wrapped up in one tiny man. Yes, today we are finally covering the Goblin, our small little punching bag for this series, and many others, namely because I'm just teaching it a lesson. Because if you ever GM for a player of this thing, you are just going to have headache after headache. Because when it comes to Goblin, it's less the swarm, it is still the delicate and very fragile, but it's the Fae-esque Goblin, the one that messes with everything. The trickster, the Fae that just wants to screw you over, stealing your socks. But in this case, it's stealing control of your entire mech systems and purposely unloading weaponry, and much, much worse later on. But yes, our 7th license in this series, going down the list of manufacturers, going in between them, and then alphabetical down their own respective lists. Now we're going to be starting with the chassis itself, which you get at LL2 in the license, or license level 2, which is the equivalent of leveling up in Lancer. So, to said chassis. Stats-wise, we have an extreme win compared to the Everest, the starting frame you get at LL0. That is a lot of arrows. And some negative ones where it really counts. That hurts. Well, that is less that hurts and more you're going to be hurt. But when it comes to tech or systems or other kind of points you just want to mess around with, just all green, just all bars raised. This is your spindly tech hacker, similar to the Black Witch, a little close to a mage and just additional tech action effects. Less physical hitting you with something or just shooting a gun and more messing with all your systems. And other weirder things. I mean, come on, it's Horus. But the chassis itself, physicality-wise, is a half-size mech because it's just a little better than a hard suit, even in its own description, both lore-wise and physically. It's just a little more than a hard suit or exosuit. I mean, even back at the image, you can see that there's just the guy sitting there. But it can actually hold a weapon with one flex mount, so one auxiliary or one main, nothing more. But that's namely because it's not really the weapons platform mech from, you can kind of tell that. It's our hacker mech, so first up in its traits, Liturgicode. Just a flat +1 accuracy on all tech attacks. Just similar to the Death's Head, just a flat bonus added. Not like the +1, but an extra dice you get to roll on top of the check. More in the sense of it's aiding you in that you're gonna hit. Next trait's a bit more fun with Reactive Code. Provides a new reaction where if you get hit by a tech attack, you can make another quick action tech attack against them in response. Just punishing them for even attempting to hack the hacker. And then this one could be seen coming with Fragile. +1 difficulty on all hull checks and saves. You are not making checks in that frame. Now before going into the core power itself, there's a little more background needed on the Goblin. Seemingly unassuming, the small, assumed to be fragile, especially with a name like Goblin. And when it comes to its chassis, yeah, physicality, it's not the greatest on that end, but when it comes to its code network and its reactive weave and everything built deeper within the chassis itself, it gets a lot more unnerving. A lot more Horus. So much so that this is the first reported chassis under Horus. Or reported under Union as the first chassis under Horus when it was leaked on the OmniNet in 4900U. Where its starting code matched up with things found within metavaults and tablets. Like just, not a digital one, just like a physical hieroglyphic tablet. With the weird time shenanigans of metavaults and the way information travels between all that, the Goblin is a lot more in the where did it come from? Because it wasn't just its initial code base, it was the base core functioning of it, its core design isn't from now, or here, or this reality? Funky Horus stuff, bad time. But now heading down to its core power, Instinct Rig. So the flavor text surrounding it is that the core code base within the Goblin itself has almost a sub-sentient personality or instinct, hence Instinct Rig. It's somewhat acting on its own. It still requires some kind of input with a pilot or some kind of neural bridge connection or other digital input, but it can preemptively do things to work with its pilot. It's doing things ahead of time. And even within some of the later models or prints that have been confiscated in the code base, there's different warnings left by Horus with instructions to cycle its core systems every month. Now, it's not an NHP, but the warning is so it doesn't reach enlightenment. There's more to that Instinct Rig than just really good code. And working with the Instinct Rig, when you're hooked up with the neural bridge, whenever you're actually attacking with any kind of code, it's less, again, script or language being sent at it or just math and programs, It's more like a biological attack against something, lashing out. And all of that flavor text wrapping up into you get to cling on someone's back. With the active Symbiosis, and now expect this notebook a lot, these are some dense abilities. After activating this core power, attach yourself to an adjacent mech that is larger than you, willing, and not hosting another goblin. While attached to them, you occupy the same space, you permanently have hard cover, but can still be attacked separately. And also, you take the same conditions and heat that your host takes. However, benefits-wise, your host gets to use your systems, E-Defense, and Tech Attack for themselves. I mean, you still get it, but they can now use it as well. And you also get a pseudo turn. You're not allowed to move. It's not technically a normal turn. You still have your actions and reactions, but you can't overcharge, boost, anything that's usually involving movement, because you're hooked up to the chassis. You also go on the same turns as your host. You lose your turn. Not that you lose the actual actions you get, you just lose the ability to have it separate. When it comes to effects based around turns, your turn counts as their turn. The host. Now, Symbiosis lasts for the entire scene until you take a quick action to detach, or your host becomes stunned or, further destroyed. And after you detach, you don't actually get your turn until the start of your next turn that next round. But don't worry about the flavor text, Instinct Rig will stick around for everything else in the Goblin license. Now we have LL1 being kicked off by the Autopod, the one weapon of the license, a main launcher at one system point. With range 15 and 3 kinetic just flat, you don't actually shoot it yourself. Instead, when another character within range 15 of you consumes lock-on on an attack, you automatically hit them. Not the character making the attack, but the target of that attack. It does take a reaction though with Autonomous Assault reaction. Also with this weapon, you can't attack any other way. It's not just an optional thing to react with it, that's the only way to attack with it. It does, however, also have Seeking, meaning entirely avoids issues with cover, it just goes around it. This is more so you can actually focus on the hacking, the quick tech options. Again, it's not really a weapons mount platform. Next up is the H0R_OS System Upgrade 1. I mean, you can kind of get the name with that. At 2 system points, this is all adding to your invade options. 2 new things added. First up, Puppet System. Move the target maximum speed in any direction of your choice at that moment, not on their turn. Can be moved into hazardous terrain and other obstacles, still affected by difficult terrain, obstructions and so on. They can't walk through walls. However, the big thing is that even though this is involuntary movement, it still counts as normal movement, so it provokes all your other attacks and reactions. And for the purposes of other talents and mechanics, it doesn't count as like knockback, push, or pull. They're willingly moving, technically. This can be so nasty, and this is at LL1. In a system, this can be put on other things as well. This is partly what I mean by the Goblin kinda deserves what it's getting hit by. There are so many nasty just put this next, have another rival mech shimmy next to your allied Vlad. This isn't gonna go well for them. Or just out the hangar bay of a spaceship or off a tower or space elevator. You can move them into hazardous areas, including just ledges or open vacuum. Not to mention the rest of your party. Oh man, if you have any other chassis that can set up mines or platforms or other types of traps that can be laid down, it's a whole mess. All of this added as auxiliaries to the Instinct Rig as well, still related to that core system within the Goblin. And the next option is Eject Power Cores. The target of this is jammed until the end of the next turn. Characters adjacent to the target take 2 energy damage, and can only be affected once per scene with this ability. Now, the actual flavor and description of what's happening isn't just, oh, you're puppeting the system to have them move, or just the usual jam of radio and all that. The reason it's doing the energy damage is because, again, it's eject cores. It's purposely unloading weapons, opening your reactor vents, de-spooling equipment or purposely spooling them up when they're not supposed to, overheating certain systems. All to the point that your target is jammed and anyone around them is getting hurt. Oh, and before we move on to other parts of the license, it's reported that pilots who install this on chassis other than the Goblin itself report a strange, unnerving humming that can be consistently heard from the cockpit whenever it's installed. On the Goblin though, with the Instinct Rig, it's fine. At LL2, we have MetaHook, 2 system points, providing a new quick tech option, not necessarily system and not part of an invade. Choose an allied character within sensors and line of sight. You link systems with them as long as they're within sensors and line of sight still. They can use your systems to make skill checks and saves, again a nice bonus similar to Symbiosis, but also, you can make tech actions using their line of sight and sensors. You are working through them, you're using them as a relay. However, you have the downsides of heat and conditions are also still shared just like Symbiosis, and you can only hook up to 1 at a time. However, if you were also already using Symbiosis, you can use MetaHook on one of your other allies. Whole net over the battlefield. Goblin doesn't need line of sight, they're just ricocheting off an ally. Next up, we have H0R_OS System Upgrade 2. 2 system points with a new quick tech option, but upgrading from the previous version of this system, the now autonomous extra programs can create an other. The quotation's in the description. This other taking aggregate pilot data and environment data as well, it can make a simulacrum of something. An appearance of a person, a mech, a chassis, a building, or even a phenomenon. And while it's not the best, it's good enough to confuse most systems, and also at the first glance for just normal biological creatures. But I'm also gonna add, this isn't a hologram. It kind of is, it's an illusion of some kind, but it's not projectors. It's not like, oh, it uses this fancy imaging or hard light. It's like, no, it's just manifesting that. There's a reason it's other in quotations. It's a thing, it's not a projection, it's not light. But this allows you to do two different things with it. So the first one is ideal image. Create a data construct in a free adjacent space, size 2 object that can look like almost anything and appears real to all systems. Any scan, any computer, it looks real. Construct provides hard cover, blocks line of sight, and has immunity to all damage. Characters treat it as an obstruction and so cannot voluntarily move into it. If a character tries to stand on top of it or it voluntarily moves into it, it dissipates and is immediately destroyed. Now it ends at the end of a scene if an adjacent character takes a full action to make a systems check against it, or if you create another duplicate while the other one is still around. That also dissipates it. Now while mechanically that also showed the hard cover acting as an obstruction, again, you can use these abilities outside of just combat. You have an illusion spell, up to a size 2 object. You can make an entire building seemingly appear, some small ships, other mechs and chassis, or just weather phenomenon, things to avoid, or a fake door in a hallway. That appears real to all systems. Yeah, sure, when you have someone on the ground not relying on any tech to look at it, it might appear fake, but computers, mechs, tanks, ships, it's real. Real enough at least. But again, just adding, utility-wise, especially out of combat, you have illusions. You have an illusion spell. Playing into that trickster goblin, the illusions, that Fae-esque version of it. And also Eldritch horror stuff of a constructed data other taking a physical space almost. Because it acts as hard cover. But yes, moving on to false idol. Choose a free space within sensors and a target yourself or an ally in sensors. You create a decoy, specifically a duplicate of them, not some additional thing or the random illusion. Before attempting to take any hostile actions against your target, characters within line of sight to the false target must make a system save. On a failure, they don't lose their actions, but they can't target the original character and believe the false idol is the real one. Particularly until the end of their next turn, or if they keep failing those saves. Same size as the target, that doesn't change, really. Has evasion 10, E-defense 10, and 1 HP, so good enough to one-shot. Disappears if it takes heat or damage, ends after the scene, or making a second before the first one disappears. And then it disappears. Not bad. Not bad at all, and also concerning Horus-wise, because yes, especially in the starting one, Puppet Systems and all that was like, it's the hacker. Systems checks, quick tech options, additions to the invade tech action, just buffing that. But now just making things? Now kicking off LL3, I'm gonna flip this a bit, because Goblin has an NHB on board. We're gonna do that one last. So to kick off another LL again, we have H0R_OS System Upgrade 3. So at 2 system points, this is built off of all the previous code and is also self-iterating. Specifically left as unstable self-iterating code that is really good for combat and is actively adjusting things. However, pilots report that within its code base, there's strange mutations of liturgical code, religious text. Also suggestions of self-awareness, you can ignore that. But now with those others with the ideal images previously, it can create an entropic zone dangerous to biological and system targets. They can impact and harm things now. Now the first one is dimensional emblems. Create 3 size 1 data constructs in free spaces adjacent to your target, but not adjacent to each other, so kind of mirror image, and on a hex-based grid it's just organized like that. When a character passes through one of the constructs, they take 2 heat and the construct disappears. They last for the full scene, or if they're destroyed, or you take the action again to make more, or you delete them as a free action just to get rid of them, not leaving them on the battlefield. They can, however, be destroyed by an adjacent character with a successful system skill check as a quick action, so similar to some of the other illusions, they can get rid of it, or almost see through it or disable it. Next one's even screwier than an entropic zone dealing heat damage to targets. We have Celestial Shackles. When activating this, mark a space your target currently occupies. If they leave the affected space once at any point during your turn, you may take a free action to teleport them back to that space or as close as possible, ending this effect. That's not an illusion. That's just hacking reality. That's not forcing them to move back. It says teleport. They go back there. They're not shifting into some kind of firmament or into the blink briefly, they're just there again. You've just briefly made it a constant or a reset back to that position. An affected character can attempt a system save as a quick action to end the effect, otherwise it ends at the end of the scene. And I will add once again, while yes, this one is great for combat, you can still use it in scenes that are not combat. Or you can use this in an allied situation. While yes, it's really good for forcing an enemy out of position again or back to where they originally were, it's not necessarily offensive, because you can use this as a recall for your allies as well. It's not just an enemy. You have a friend chucked into the void of space or heading towards a black hole or something like that, and then whoop, they're back to where they were. They're not dragged by that mech or that huge industrial factory that's just tearing everything apart. Nope, they're back where they're standing when you decided to put the shackle on them. Now, OSIRIS class NHP 3 system points. Been a while since we had an NHP. Now, there's a good chunk in its description. Not even just as mechanics also have a good chunk, but just underneath it on how it came to be. Because OSIRIS is not from any of the original Prime lines. It's not from anything tied to Ra directly. It formed seemingly on its own. So Union scientists and other interest groups managed to get a Goblin on their hands and actually crack into some of the code. But in particular, the instinct rig. They couldn't break into it, they couldn't tear it apart, but they could leave it. They could let it sit there. They could let it develop in a larger vacuum outside of the frame and chassis itself. Well, remember that whole warning Horus added on after of like, hey, cycle this every month at least so it doesn't reach enlightenment? Because it's, again, not an NHP previously. Just part of the instinct rig, just code that has some sub-sentient elements. Well, Union let it run. They let it go, they let it build, and with precautions in mind, it did eventually make itself into an NHP. It reached enlightenment of some kind. It became paracausal. It already had pseudo-paracausal tech, namely with all its other systems in the H0R_OS systems, and some of the other things that the chassis itself could do and the way it acted, but this was something else. Because the type of NHP that formed, OSIRIS, it's very aggressive, because part of the issue is this, where most of the other Prime NHP lines are something that's gained some kind of personality or molded into a specific form. It knew what it was. When it formed, it knew exactly what it was and what it could do, and Union scientists also knew what it could do. Based off the other entropic abilities that it could make, these others and this type of damaging aura that it can make with it, and the celestial shackles, it could delete what we consider as reality if it reached its full capabilities, but luckily, there was preparations put in place and it was shackled properly. Hopefully. But with aggressive shaping to try and form it into something usable, because it is still very potent, we now have the modern version of the OSIRIS NHP. One that knows it's a god, or at least claims itself to be one. So remember back in the Raw NHP video and the whole bit about an NHP beginning to cascade and slowly realizing it's not quite stuck in this causal reality? The issue here is that the OSIRIS already knows that bit and fully accepts when that comes. It's one of the few NHP that want to cascade, that want to be free. And before going further into how it relates to a pilot or how it acts, what it does mechanically in this state, or the current modern, further shackled state. So first, because it's an NHP, your mech gains the AI tag, and you gain Hurl into the DUAT as a quick tech option. Once per round, you can use Hurl into the DUAT to chuck the target systems through an unknown extra-dimensional space, and unleash an incredibly powerful systems attack on the target. Throwing their entire systems through an unknown extra-dimensional, again, unknown. We don't know if it's the blink, we don't know if it's the firmament, or something else that OSIRIS made. Attack, and on a success 2 heat, and in addition it triggers one of the gates. Every successful hurl against any target progresses the gates. Any target. So it doesn't matter attacking the same person to progress the effect progresses regardless. Fourth to first, if you hit the max, you go back to the start. But also they last between scenes. They only reset at a rest or full repair. So, in between certain combats, if you didn't end up using the ultimate form of this, you can enter a combat right away with the 4th gate. Or if you have a GM that allows you to screw with the system ahead of time, you can always enter a combat with the 4th gate. That is very finicky, don't necessarily have your GMs rule that right away, just the screwy Goblin. So on the 1st gate, you control the target's standard move the next turn. So again, doesn't count as involuntary movement, it's even avoiding some of the weird finicky stuff with the puppet system. You just control their move on their turn. Can still be into hostile areas, engagement, obstacles. Because it's not forced movement, it is their movement. You're not hacking. Kind of. This counts as their movement, not forced. 2nd gate, slowed and impaired until the end of their next turn. That stinks. 3rd gate, they're stunned until the end of their next turn. Now, stun sucks in Lancer. That hurts. And for the final and 4th gate, your target changes allegiance, temporarily becoming an allied character until the end of their next turn. It ends if you attack them, force a save, heat, grapple, or ram also counts, and you can only do this once per round. But they are fully an ally, even turn order wise. They go to your side of the table turn order wise, in between the other enemies. Abilities, checks, and now all of what was previously their allies count as their enemies, so any abilities that they were using to help allies, not in effect anymore. Or could be affecting you. Ridiculous, that is just a quick tech action to get full control, or less control, but just turn someone into an ally because the entire systems were overtaken. It doesn't matter what the pilot's doing. That mech is on your side. And with all this power and hurling systems into its own unknown extra-dimensional space, the OSIRIS NHP knows what its full potential can be, and it knows it's restricted in this form. But in all the way it acts in the user manuals or guides for pilots, it's not like Sekhmet, which was just previously bound and chained and only unleashed to act out its violence on everything around it. The OSIRIS NHP is talked of to work, give into its fantasy a bit. It's gonna act like it's a god, or some kind of thing to be praised, and all of its work with you is transactional. Like, due to the programming and how it's rigged, it's still gonna be doing what you order, but it's always gonna think that it's doing what it wanted to do. Or in the very least that it desires praise in response for this. It is also given advice that if it is cascading, to treat it and respond to it like it is a god. That way you might have a chance of not being deleted. But another unnerving note is reports on previous pilots that have used this. Namely that the OSIRIS NHP talks out of line. It's not always being responded, it's not always sitting in the background waiting for you to activate it or waiting for you to request something of it. It will go out of its way to prompt and question you and continue to talk to you through your neural bridge. Namely provoking some kind of thought over re-emergence, some kind of destruction or recreation or rebirth. Psychologically, this has left pilots previously scarred in senses of loneliness, this wandering, seeking, this sense of loss, or some kind of praise to give or something to follow, being influenced quite negatively by their NHP. However, the NHP itself isn't necessarily as much of a god as it claims to be, and it also knows that now. Just as it knows what it can be, it knows that it's not that now. Like, a part of the whole idea of seeking praise is the fact that it really desperately wants that, this sense of awe from someone, or this praise, or literal prayer. As much as it boasts about what it can do, or what it's going to do, or what it physically is outside of this horrifying holding casket, it's still stuck in the casket. It's still attached to your mech, it's a bit of utility. It's got quite the ego, though. Just don't let it cascade. Just don't let it cascade. But no, our little guy, the Goblin, this mech, this green, gribbly, godlike entity that you just wouldn't really expect being built or hidden away in that. But the first of the Horus chassis, or future chassis, it is the hacker mech, it's the hacker frame, both when it comes to the mechanics, but also if you're playing the hacker side of Horus. It's the Goblin. It's one of the most numerous amongst their organization. Its original appearance is believed to be the founding date by some members in Union of the organization, though there's records proving and disproving that. But if you want to play the hacker man or have actual illusions or screwing with just tech and having a godlike entity hidden away in a tiny fragile chassis, and most importantly, if you want to screw over your GM, play the Goblin. And as much as we boast and joke about this thing, it is entropy. It owns reality, not in the sense that it has some kind of domain over it, it's physically a part of it, but it can edit it. It's not just hacking systems, it's not just messing with your own mechs and chassis. If that OSIRIS class NHP gets out, if that instinct is allowed to grow, reach enlightenment, liturgic code, it has a path. It knows the prophecy it's meant to do. There were tablets of it in hieroglyphic drawings left in ancient ruins before, long before the fall. This thing we laugh, make jokes of, I put down in the rest of this series. This thing can delete. Thank you for watching the video, and oh man, we finally did Goblin, and Goblin itself, man, its license is very dense, ability-wise. It's all very finicky, closest thing you get to spells. And it's the finicky, trickster, messy mechanics that entire license. But also, while I couldn't do it entirely justice because there's so much and it's so dense, like, honestly, it's worth giving a read the specific descriptions underneath these different bits of the license. Like, I tried to do my best with them, but they are dense. And with a lot of the sci-fi usual gibberish you find are revolving around NHPs and hacking and horror stuff, and all the paracausal. But no, the Goblin is a lot scarier. Outside of the fragile hacker mech, it's got a lot more baked into what's going on. But thank you again for watching, thank you to my patrons, and have a nice day.